Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org.
Congress is now deciding the future of funding for public radio and public television. Hello, this is Tom Michael, General Manager of Boise State Public Radio. This rescission request, or clawback of approved funding, passed through the U.S. House, and now it's before the U.S. Senate. This is the time to let your senator from Idaho know about your support of the news and music that public radio provides. Contact information at protectmypublicmedia.org.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Samantha Wright, filling in for Jim Gaudette. It's Idaho Matters. McCall's Christmas tree is dying. Well, it's sick. The Engelmann spruce sits in Art Roberts Park in downtown McCall, and for more than 30 years, it's lit up every year with Christmas lights. But now this community tree is sick, maybe dying. And to find out more, and if the tree can be saved, Drew Dotson, the editor of the Valley Lookout, joins us now. Drew, hi, welcome back to Idaho Matters.
Hi, Gemma. How are you today?
Good. Okay, give us the history of this tree. You dug into this when you wrote your story on the tree, but this tree has a long history.
It does, and in fact, we don't even know exactly how far back it goes. I wasn't able to determine when the tree was planted in Art Roberts Park, or if it was deliberately planted there, or if it was just growing there, and the park was established. So we don't know all the way back to its origins. What we do know is that in the late 1980s is when it started kind of becoming this holiday centerpiece, if you will, for McCall. That was when Tom and Tommy Grody, who were the publishers of the Star News, McCall's local newspaper, for about 40 years up until here recently, they looked at the tree and said, well, gosh, this would be perfect. And so they started this effort to decorate it every year. Idaho Power volunteered bucket trucks and crews, and they'd come out and string it with lights and garland. And it's really been that way since the late 1980s. In the early 2000s, some different local businesses took over the decoration effort. And then finally, in 2009, the city of McCall has headed it up ever since then. And each winter, a week, maybe 2 weeks before Christmas, the city does a little tree lighting ceremony, and it's a big celebration, and it's just kind of become one of those iconic spots in downtown McCall.
And if for folks who haven't seen it, where is this tree? It's right on the water, right?
It is, yeah. So it's in downtown McCall between Idaho 55 and Payette Lake. If you're familiar with the ice rink, the Manchester Ice and Event Center, it's kind of right across the highway from that. It's a little bit closer to the roadway than it is to the lake, but it's in that intermediate zone there, right where Art Roberts is. In fact, it's not too far off the sidewalk, right along Idaho 55, right through downtown there.
Okay, how do we know the tree is sick? What's wrong with the tree?
Well, so McCall Parks and Recreation Director Kurt Wolf, who is also a certified arborist, he's been watching it closely for a couple of years. Obviously, Wolf and his staff are responsible for maintaining city parks, and that includes, of course, trees within. And so here in recent years, they've noticed that the tree appears to be stressed, and some of the branches on the southeastern face of the tree are thinning out. And that's relevant because if you think about the flow of traffic in that area, the southeastern face of the tree, those southeastern facing branches are actually the closest to the roadway. And so what Wolf thinks is happening is that road spray during the winter, the road is never completely dry in the winter, it seems like. But that road spray, as cars pass by, is kind of migrating over to that tree and not only getting in the branches, but the soils around the tree. And so he's actually noticed, he's observed elevated salt concentrations in the soil around the tree. And he's, he admits he can't outright prove it, but he's very confident that it is in fact these road salts, these de-icing agents, that are causing this tree stress.
Well, and I was going to say these are road salts, and they're used in the winter because anybody who's been McCall in the winter knows there's snow on the road, and that's what you use, what they've been using to try and de-ice. So let's pause for a minute, talk about the road salts, and let's talk about Highway 55. BoiseDev.com has been following the story of pine trees dying along the highway. This is after one of them fell and killed an eighth grader 2 years ago, and that sparked a really big debate over what's been killing the trees. Can you break this down a little more?
Well, and so you kind of summed it up well there, but essentially is, I mean, anybody who's driven from Boise to McCall or vice versa on Idaho 55, I mean, you drive down the highway and you just notice the glut of kind of orange brownish needles on trees lining the highway. And so for years there's been speculation about, what might be causing that. I think the death of the teenager that you mentioned a couple of years ago kind of sparked even more interest, and getting to the bottom because it was a dead tree that fell on the car.
Mm.
Now whether that's a result of the needle blight and the damage we're seeing to these trees, of course we don't know, but the it really ticked up interest in it. And so at that point, regional forestry health experts, ITD, started looking a little more closely at the problem, and um, they have so far not pointed to road salts as the likely culprit. Instead, they believe it is a variety of different things: insects, temperatures, humidity, emissions from vehicles, drought, you name it. There's just any number of factors that forestry experts believe are influencing this. And part of the reason for that belief, and this is kind of interesting, I didn't know this. Um, these evergreen trees, most of them carry 3 years of needle growth. And so at any given time, you look at the tree and you'll see the last 3 years of needles on it.
Hmm.
And so what these experts have seen is that the trees are pushing out new green healthy needles. It appears to be there's those second year needles that are blighted and have that kind of sickly orange brown looking color. Um, at this point, though, no, there's still no, there's lots of theories. Nobody knows for sure what's causing it.
Well, and you mentioned the needle blight. I know ITD has looked at that quite a bit, and those other factors. But I got to say, a lot of people that I've talked to who live up there, who drive the road a lot, they are convinced that it's road salts. But like you said, we're not sure. Nobody's really sure. We're speaking with Drew Dotson, editor of the Valley Lookout, about an iconic tree in McCall that's dying and what's being done to save it. So let's get back to McCall's community tree. Is it sick the same way the trees on Highway 55 are sick? Does Wolf say there might be a difference here?
Well, so it's generally, yes, it's sick the same way, but to the degree to which is a little different than the trees you might see just, along the highway between here and Boise. One of the key differences that Wolf pointed out is, uh, at where the spruce is in downtown McCall there, the community tree, the speed limit is 25 miles per hour.
Hmm.
That generates a very different amount and travel distance as far as road spray than, say, a 65 mile per hour stretch of roadway.
Mm.
And so that could be part of what's going on here. The city also, they have been working to try and, uh, find a way to make the tree survive, because at this point they're concerned for its long-term survival. Wolf says that he has seen the brown and orange coloring on the needles that you'll see along the highways. However, I can tell you, to the naked eye and driving by, every day, I personally haven't seen it, so
Mm.
it certainly seems to be less pronounced.
So Wolf wants the Idaho Transportation Department to stop using road salts in downtown McCall. As we said, it does snow a lot in McCall. Is that a possibility? Can they do that?
Well, well, we'll see, right? That was the plan, is to ask ITD this summer, even if they won't stop, maybe a reduced amount in that specific area. One relevant point to consider here, and this predates my time. But my understanding is roughly 10 to 15 years ago, road salts really were not widely used,
Hmm.
certainly not in Valley County. And so instead of, now we're kind of spoiled. You drive up and down the road, and most of the time, unless it's actively snowing, it's clear.
Eh,
10, 15 years ago, that wasn't the case. You drove on packed snow all winter, and that's just what you did. It seems kind of hard to believe now, but it wasn't that long ago, but that's how things were.
wow. Okay. And no doubt that's partly why people think it's road salts because if you've lived there forever and then the road salts are introduced and the trees start to die, I could see where you'd think that. Um,
Right.
right. So okay. So while the debate over road salts is going on and whether or not we can stop them, what is the Parks Department? What is Wolf thinking might help the tree? Are there some other things that they can do to try and save the tree?
So this is fascinating to me. There's a couple options, both of which essentially involve reducing the sodium loading on the tree. One option is to actually remove the soils around the tree each spring to basically refresh them. And so
Hmm.
that winter's worth of road salts that migrated over there on the road spray would be removed year after year.
Wow.
Another option is apparently there are shrubs and foliage that will actually absorb the sodium, and so that's another option is to plant these sodium absorbing shrubs and plants around the tree to kind of help it that way. Um, those are the two primary options I've heard of from the city at this point. One important thing to touch on that I think is kind of weighs heavy in all this is that, we're not Wolf is not just worried about, road salts killing the tree. It's not necessarily that the road salts themselves will just, bring the tree down overnight. However, what it does do is stress the tree and make it more vulnerable to other diseases, including insects, the bark beetle, for example.
Hmm.
And so there's concern that the road salts themselves may not do the tree in, but they may open the door for something else too.
That's interesting. That's fascinating. And I love the idea that there are these, little protector shrubs that you can put around the tree to try and, try and keep the salt out. I just have this, like little sentinels around the tree. Um,
Right.
so you called this McCall's community tree in your story. Just how iconic is this tree? Is this a key feature in McCall, especially at Christmas?
I think most people would say so. Obviously, that's subjective, and you may think differently than I. But just from the standpoint of its history, I always say that the bearing wall, the bear sculpture in Art Roberts Park there, it's kind of right beneath the tree. That's the most photographed place in McCall, and so
Mm.
this park collectively between the bear sculpture, the tree, between Payette Lake, this is a place that people make memories in McCall, and that goes beyond even just the annual holiday ceremony, the tree lighting ceremony and all the nights throughout the winter that the tree, it just beautifully lights up the night. It's colored lights around Christmas time, and then it goes to white lights later in the winter. And you can imagine just with the snow on the tree, and it's beautiful. Um, and so, I think it's kind of funny to talk about skylines in a rural place like McCall, but it's an important part of McCall's skyline. It's kind of think about all the change McCall has endured and been through since this kind of became a community staple. I mean, back in the late 80s, the mill had just barely shut down, right? Like McCall was just kind of beginning its transformation to industrial logging community to bona fide tourism community. And so from that standpoint, I think it a lot of people would be really sad to see it go.
Mm. Wow, we've been speaking with Drew Dodson, the editor of the Valley Lookout, about an iconic tree in McCall that's sick and what's being done to save it. We're going to put a picture of the tree on our website, boisestatepublicradio.org, along with a link to Drew's story. Drew, thank you. This has been fascinating.
Thank you for having me.
This is the Idaho Matters podcast. I'm Gemma Gaudette.
These days, there's so much news, it can be hard to keep up with what it all means for you, your family, and your community. The Consider This podcast from NPR features our award-winning journalism. 6 days a week, we bring you a deep dive on a news story and provide the context and analysis that helps you make sense of the news. We get behind the headlines. We get to the truth. Listen to the Consider This podcast from NPR.